Welcome to Austin Tech Connect, the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. Presented to you by Netspend. Homegrown in Austin, Netspend has been a leading provider of consumer and business payment solutions for almost 25 years. From prepaid cards to mobile bank accounts to money movement services, Netspend connects people, brands, and payment products to deliver innovative financial solutions.
Welcome to Austin Tech Connect, the podcast about the future of Austin's technology community. My name is Tom Singer, and I'm the CEO at the Austin Technology Council. And each week on this podcast, I engage local leaders to hear their stories of success, to learn about what their companies are doing, and to get their thoughts on the future of our Austin technology community. And this week, I am happy to be joined by Razat Gaurav. He is the CEO at Planview. Hey, Razat, welcome to the show.
Tom, thanks for having me.
So we're going to have a fun discussion today, but for those of you who don't know who Razat is, he has been in the tech industry for almost 25 years, running enterprise software companies and growing businesses. 2 years ago, he joined us here in Austin, Texas from Chicago. Hey, Illinois' loss, Texas's gain, to take over the role at CEO at Planview. Now, Planview has a very rich history, being born and grown here in Austin, but now has a global footprint. And he loves doing that. He loves growing businesses, and he likes to listen and learn in all situations. And from what I understand, he also likes a really good cup of coffee and a nice bottle of wine. So, Razat, let's jump into this. Let's talk about your journey. Where did your career in tech start, and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, Tom, right out of college, I got into management consulting, and that was in many ways a continuation of college. But then in the late 90s, I got seduced by the growth and the innovation that was being driven by the first tech bubble. And I got recruited by a company which was based in Dallas called i2 Technologies. I was still based in Chicago. And I took the leap and left the very safe and risk-free world of management consulting, maybe a little, stiff and rigid, to the wild, wild west of enterprise software technology with a company that was just growing very rapidly and was really helping transform and bring a lot of data and decision support capabilities to the supply chain world. And I joined as a product manager, and I've never looked back and never left tech ever since.
So making that move to i2 Technologies, and I remember i2 Technologies, making that move, what was the biggest difference in sort of the day-to-day life from being management consulting to being right in that tech startup growth-oriented world?
Well, of course, being in management consulting, I was with a very large firm called Ernst Young, that management consulting practice, where things were a lot more structured and sort of regimented in some ways. Your career path was clearly visible. At i2, things were a lot less structured, and with the growth came a lot of opportunity, but also the challenges of really being an entrepreneur, right? You really had to be a self-starter, and you didn't have as much of a structure around orienting your career path. You had to really define that for yourself. And then just the environment was a lot more dynamic and fluid. And one of the things I like to tell new recruits coming into the technology world is, if you're not comfortable with highly variable environment, things that are always going to be constantly changing, probably tech is not the right space for you, right? But if you thrive on the change, if you thrive on the environment being fluid, and you thrive on that learning mindset, then there's no other place like tech.
Well, and I remember the 90s. I kind of cut my teeth working around tech. I worked for service companies like law firms and banks and consulting firms that actually sold and serviced the tech community. The 90s was a little bit of the Wild West in tech. Do you think it's different now? Have we settled in? Is tech a little more predictable, or is it still the Wild West?
There are different elements where we've gone through learning cycles since the 90s to now, especially in the enterprise software space, right? I mean, for one thing, the business model is so much different, right? cloud computing brought with it all kinds of new possibilities, but it also changed the fundamental business model to much more of a recurring revenue-oriented model, right? And that, with that comes inherently more predictability. You can forecast your revenues a lot better. You cannot just be transactional with the customers. You've got to really have a longer term relationship. Customer success is really, really important. It's not just something that people can put on their PowerPoint slides and walk away from. You've really got to be committed to that, because your relationship with your customer is only as good as the length of the term of your contract, which typically in enterprise software is roughly about a 3-year term, right? So you've got to justify your existence every 3 years with the customer. So customer success has become really important. So things have changed and evolved and matured in some ways, but the part that I think remains true to tech and definitely true to enterprise software is that that thirst for innovation, that thirst for really understanding pain points that companies and organizations are experiencing, and then innovating with new technologies, new capabilities, new processes that technology and software can enable. That hasn't changed, right? And that's still the same. And what we try to do at Planview is create the right balance between being mature, being as we're growing up, having that predictability, but not losing the edge in innovating and encouraging our teams to think out of the box. And really continue to push the envelope with new products and new offerings that need to continue to be the lifeblood of technology. So I think that right balance, we're in a much better situation with that now than we were, let's say, 25 years ago. But it's really important that we don't get so regimented that we lose that innovative mindset either.
Nice. So a lot of people who listen to this podcast that are reaching out to me aren't people who are in senior management. A lot of people are working for companies in and around Austin, and some of them, they kind of have their design on how do I grow up and run a company, either starting their own or coming into a management role in a technology company. So where did you go? So you're at I2. When was your first leadership role in the C-suite in a company, and how did you get there?
Yeah, my trajectory was a little non-traditional. Typically, what you find in enterprise software is people grow through one functional track, and they take on more and more responsibilities. And then at some point, you become a general management sort of a person, right? And you wear multiple hats. My trajectory was a little different, where I left the world of management consulting, came into product management, which in many ways I'm still a recovering product manager, right? And in enterprise software, your business starts with the product, right? And of course, the product is based on what problems you're trying to solve for your customers, what efficiencies you're trying to bring, and what pain points you're trying to address for your customers. But it starts with a product. And it was just such an amazing learning ground in understanding customer needs, but also balancing that with working with engineering teams and really deep and brilliant technologists to sort of take an idea and bring it to fruition with an actual product, and going through the launch process and driving early adoption and then growing that business. So product management was a great way for me to start my career in technology in some ways. From there, I got into sales because I enjoyed the process of engaging with customers and spending a lot of my time with customers. I enjoyed the thrill of a competitive, evaluation process and beating the competition and winning a deal, right? And really helping monetize all the innovation that was being brought to the market. So I cut my teeth into sales, and then I got into a general management role, right? And in the late 90s and early 2000s, that was a very unusual track for a product manager to go into sales and then get into general management roles. It's still not very common, but again, that's part of the part of the magic of being in a tech company is, allowing for a culture and an environment where you can be a self-starter and have the opportunities just like I did. That's what we try to do at Planview is to really encourage folks that may have started maybe in a professional services role or a customer support role or an engineering role. But as they engage in their day-to-day business and they get a broader sense of the business based on what their interests are, do we allow people to really cross-pollinate? And we encourage that. I know a lot of other tech companies do the same thing. And that's, by the way, very different from starting in banking or starting in manufacturing or retail, where that same sort of cross-track opportunity is very limited. My first role at a C level was at I2, and we ended up selling I2 to a company called JDA, which is now rebranded as Blue Yonder. I took on even more responsibilities there. Went and lived in Europe for about 3.5 years, running the EMEA region, which was a great learning opportunity, right? And then finally took on my first, and then took on global product management, global sales roles at Blue Yonder, and then finally made a very risky move of going from a $1 billion+ revenue company to a $45 million company based out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, called LLamasoft, where that was my first CEO role, and I just had a ton of fun with tripling the size of that business. And driving a ton of innovation, ton of new product offerings, driving customer growth, and ultimately, really, it was a great value creation story for our employees, for our shareholders, for everyone involved. And so, but through that 25-year journey, I think the few things that have remained sort of consistent. One is the learning mindset. Two, in really being able to be open-minded about developing important mentorship roles. There's so many people that I've gained from who took the time to mentor me and to coach me through my career. I was an eager beaver early in my career. I had a lot of growing up to do. At some point, I realized it's not so important to always know the answer to every question. It's more important to know what questions to ask, right? And through that journey, just having a lot of mentors and coaches that helped me navigate through different twists and turns that any career sort of takes was super helpful. But again, the most important thing is listening, learning, adapting, and just having fun with it.
Well, and I love your attitude about the learning mindset. This episode is sponsored by Forward Security. Forward's highly accomplished team delivers application and cloud security solutions, focusing on mid-size organizations in finance, e-commerce, and health. Their Eureka DevSecOps platform makes managing application and cloud security tools, processes, and issues simple and effective, while their Eureka DevSecOps service helps with achieving DevSecOps transformation goals. If you're a software provider looking to reduce risk, gain market share, and increase profitability and privacy, check them out at forwardsecurity.com, and we appreciate their support of this podcast. I recently kind of got to sit at the foot of a very successful entrepreneur here in town. And one of the things that he said was, anytime a CEO doesn't say the words, "I don't know," or "oops, I made a mistake with that one," you have a bad CEO. He says a really good CEO knows they don't know everything. And when they stumble, which all humans do in whatever role they're in, they're willing to admit, "Oops, I screwed up on that one." And so, that kind of goes in line. But we also run into a lot of leaders who never admit they have anything to learn, never admit they have a mistake. So what advice do you have for those people?
It's really bizarre in some ways that when you pretend you know everything, or you put so much pressure on yourself, right? It's liberating to be able to just take a breath and say, you know what? I don't know about this, but I'm willing to learn, right? I mean, how liberating is that? You just relieve all that pressure in a big way, and so I've always had that mindset. My career trajectory is not a series of successes; it's a series of failures from which I've learned. Right, again, when I'm looking for leadership talent in our organization, I'm not just looking for all the successes that the person has had. I'm looking for what have been those important learning moments of learning, right? And moments of learning happen a lot more with failures than they do with successes, right? And so I always encourage leaders to not put that undue pressure for no reason on themselves, and be willing to say, I don't know. And by the way, I go onto our all hands calls, or I'll have small sessions with sub teams within our organization, and I probably end up asking the most number of questions because curiosity is such a powerful tool to use, right? And so I think Einstein or someone said, I'm not a genius, I'm just curious, right? And that's a dictum that I've just seen be so common across so many people that I've admired and learned from myself, right? And asking the right questions, being curious, being present in the moment to really be authentically interested in learning is an amazing. I'm not smarter than most people. I'm definitely not the smartest cookie in the shop. But the core competency that you can develop, and any of us can develop, is the core competency of learning and being curious, right? And when you do that, you start bridging the gap, the knowledge gap between yourself and anyone else that you may be competing with, in the competitive landscape, in other fields of life. So again, being a strong leader is being a strong learner in many ways.
I love that, and I agree. In fact, between this podcast and my own and a couple of others that I've hosted over the years, I've interviewed 1,200 executives. So I love the curiosity of being able to ask questions. And then in my role at ATC, I've met with about 100 of our local leaders to kind of find things out. And it's interesting, just along the way, I always remember asking one leader, I won't say who it is or give that away, but what mistakes have you made in this role? And she got angry that I asked the question and said, what are you implying? And went down this whole path of, I was rude to ask that question. What did I mean that she'd made mistakes? And it was like, wow, I was just kind of curious what you learned. Wow. And so I always find those types of people a little off-putting. So I love everything that you're saying. So let's switch over here to Planview. So a couple of years ago that you were recruited in to lead Planview. How did that come about? And tell us exactly what Planview is doing. And I understand that 2022 was a record year. So let's talk about where you are now and where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe a good place to start would be, where we started. And again, the history of Planview is rooted in the history of the tech space in Austin, right? The genesis of the company was your quintessential all-American software startup company, right? Where the founders thesis was to bring projects, resources, and financials into a single frame. And with that came a minimum viable product, bootstrapped, as you can imagine, got some early adopter customers. And with that, raised some initial venture capital funding. Some of that came from local sources, and then grew the product footprint to not just be looking at projects and resources, but to look at portfolios of projects, right? So how do you prioritize in allocating both resource capacity as well as capital allocations across a portfolio of initiatives, right? And that was in many ways the first time that notion of a portfolio view came into the frame in organizations, and that gained a lot of traction. That drove a lot of growth for the company for the next several years. And then, of course, with that growth came additional investments, expansion to other regions beyond North America. So today we have over 35% of our revenues comes from places in Western Europe, parts of Asia. And we are now today a global leader in what's called portfolio and work management solutions, right? And we work across industries. We've got over 4,000 customers globally. And the backdrop that we play in is, with all the changes that are going on, both in the outside world as well as the inside world of organizations, companies have to transform, right? And at the same time, no company in the world has unlimited capital and resources to transform, right? Your name could be Amazon or Goldman Sachs. You're still constrained by capital and resources. And by the way, that couldn't be any more relevant in today's macroeconomic environment, right? So how you make those decisions on where to allocate capital and resources, how to prioritize in this constantly changing world, and how do you take a data-driven paradigm to making those decisions? And then once you've made those decisions, how do you deliver on the outcomes, the business outcomes on those initiatives? Could be project initiatives, could be product initiatives at scale is something we help with. And a lot of that delivery happens by embracing lean and agile principles and frameworks in a digital form. And so today we work with the likes of Dell, a local company, the likes of AT&T, the likes of IKEA, the likes of Royal Bank of Canada, and many, many other companies all around the world in helping with their transformation journeys. And of course, we are living in a digital age, so a lot of the transformation takes the shape of digital transformation. So a lot of our work has evolved in helping companies really be thoughtful about how they are making investments in digital transformation, but also how are they extracting the value and the return on those investments in a predictable and a sustainable way. So that's the overall business backdrop we're in. You're right. Last year was a record year for us, despite some of the macroeconomic headwind. And we just finished our first quarter, last week, and we had a fantastic Q1. We actually came ahead of our budgeted plan. We were at about 117, 118% of our bookings for our budgeted plan, which is unusual. When I talk to peers and when I talk to some of my friends in other organizations, enterprise software companies are under a lot of pressure, and we see that because a lot of our customers are under pressure as well. But in a bizarre way, this macroeconomic environment where there's a lot of change and yet there's more constrained capital and resources, it provides a tailwind for the need for our solutions to really focus on these fundamentals. And we're very well situated in helping companies do that. And of course, we're pushing the envelope all the time in bringing new capabilities. For example, we just recently, in the last few months, have launched a new road mapping capability that's become a part of our footprint. We've launched new OKR frameworks that companies can adopt in a digital way as part of our platform. We are just in the process of working with some early adopter customers and applying data science and artificial intelligence capabilities in an applied way in helping understand sentiment analysis in how they're executing on their initiatives. We're toying with ChatGPT right now. In fact, one of my calls this week is with our chief data scientist and the team on exploring, how can we, what are the new possibilities that offers, and being able to take advantage of use cases in a pragmatic, practical way for our customers. So that's the overarching business we're in. We're passionate about customer success because we are a completely a subscription-oriented business model. It's very fundamental to the way we drive growth is to really keep our retention rates very strong. And that only happens if you're authentic about customer success in driving customer value. So that's Planview and what we do.
Nice. And how did they find you? And what do you think the future holds for you now in the CEO role after 2 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I had just sold my previous business, a company called LLamasoft, which was in the supply chain design analytics space, also AI enabled analytics space, to a company called Coupa. And there was a new set of investors that were involved with Planview at the end of 2020, and they called me on Christmas Eve, and that's how the discussion started.
It's like Santa Claus brought you the new job.
Yeah, yeah. At first, I wasn't sure, but the more I sort of dug into the underlying fundamentals of the business, the problem domain, the more interested I got, and then I have to say, for my family and I, moving to Austin was an attractive proposition. We had some old friends who lived here. We loved the culture. We loved the live music scene. And being able to be a part of the community locally here was also attractive for us.
Nice. Well, that's a good segue into my next question. So how do you see the Austin tech community? Are we strong? Are we healthy? And where do you think we're going over the next decade? What's the future of tech in Austin?
Yeah, clearly the tech scene in Austin has grown dramatically, I would say, in the last 15, 20 years. In some ways, this was the hotbed of technology, with the semiconductor industry in the early days in this country. Of course, Dell has been a big anchor point and a huge success locally in the PC industry. And then there's been a thriving venture capital community, which has brought with it startups. And Planview today is beyond a startup. We've scaled the organization, but we were a startup, and we wouldn't have existed without some of the early investments from local venture capitalists. So the community has grown, and I think it's thriving. More recently, of course, the move of Tesla. Now you can debate, is Tesla an automotive company? Is it a tech company? It's more tech than automotive, is the way I define it. With Oracle moving the headquarters here, and the continued sort of movement to Austin as a hub is something that I see continuing to happen and snowballing in some ways. There's a lot of fundamentals that have caused that, right? Very positive fundamentals. Part of it is just access and availability to talent. The fact that we have UT Austin in our backyard is a huge plus point for attracting tech companies and tech talents. The fact that we have compared to the Bay Area, even though the prices have been rising in terms of real estate costs and office costs, living costs, they're still relatively lower than in the Bay Area, right? And just the local infrastructure, what we find is we're able to recruit people that have young families very well to Austin, just given the availability of public education and the safety network and relatively affordable housing for our employees is a huge plus. Now we've got to watch that because some of that is changing, right? And the supply demand. The ever challenging supply demand equation is playing out here as prices have been growing. Now, I think in the last 6 months, things have calmed down a little bit. It was getting a little overheated, I would say. And we need to continue to think about the next sort of 10 years and not just the next 1 or 2 years, right? In how do we sustain and build the community here. But I look at Austin as sort of an amazing tech hub in the country and can be 4 to 5 times the size it is today if we're able to continue to take a long-term view of it, to create the right environment, the right infrastructure, and continue to work as an industry together with local governments to really drive the changes needed in especially the underlying infrastructure and some of the surrounding development that needs to happen to continue to encourage tech to come. And what I find is, when you have entrepreneurs and innovators coming, and establishing their tech companies, the investors will follow, right? And that's clearly what's happened here in Austin, and that's a sort of a self-reinforcing cycle, and I think that'll continue here for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with everything you just said. In fact, one of the things we're trying to do as we sort of reinvent and retool the Austin Technology Council is we're trying to get leaders like you to come to the table and to have these conversations, because that's what we did 30 years ago. What we're living in Austin today was because community leaders stood up and said, here's what we would like to build. And together and independently, they worked on this. And, therefore the foundation of what we have today is because leaders got together and really talked about what the future could look like. And I tell everybody, a baby born today, if she starts a business in 30 years, in 2053, what does Austin look like? What are we doing today that lays the foundation for that? That young woman to start her business in 30 years. So I think that's where we all come together, right? And that's the role of the Austin Technology Council.
I think that's a very important discussion to have, right? Because I think part of that is to get aligned on what are those attributes that will future-proof the tech community, the continued growth of the tech sort of industry in the Austin area. And I think a lot of good things have happened that have resulted in where we are today versus where we were, let's say, 15 years ago. But in order to future-proof that, we can't take that for granted, right? And we've got to, again, re-anchor ourselves on those attributes and do all the right things now that'll help future-proof the next generation of growth.
Yep. No, I fully agree with you. That's what Austin needs to do, is to be looking towards that future. So that leads me into my final question that I ask everybody who is on this podcast. And that is, I personally believe that community, collaboration, and conversations can solve all problems. So I like to ask the guests on the show, which one of those words, community, collaboration, conversation, resonates the most with you and why?
In many ways, all three of those are very interconnected, right? And at its most fundamental level, I think it starts with a conversation, right? If we're willing to have a conversation, we'll have a good chance of being able to collaborate, and we'll have a good chance of developing a community. I don't think communities and collaboration exist without the conversation. So that's the one I would anchor on as the starting point.
Nice. I appreciate that. Well, Razat, thank you so much for being a guest here on Austin Tech Connect. And thank you to Planview for your support of the Austin Technology Council.
Great. Thank you, Tom.
Hey, and thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. You know what? Is your company a member of the Austin Technology Council? There's never been a better time for you to get involved and lend your voice to what we're trying to do to set up the future of Austin Tech. So please check us out at austintechnologycouncil.org, and we look forward to having you as a member.
Thanks for listening to the Austin Tech Connect podcast. Make sure your company is a member of the Austin Technology Council and add your voice to the future of our tech ecosystem in Central Texas.